Good morning. See, it's time to start. Be singing, I want to be a worker. I want to be a worker for the Lord. I want to love and trust His holy word. I want to sing and pray and be busy every day in the vineyard of the Lord. I will work, I will pray in the vineyard of the Lord. I will work, I will pray, I will labor every day in the vineyard of the Lord. I want to be a worker every day. I want to lead the erring in the way that leads to heaven above, where all is peace and love in the vineyard of the Lord. I will work, I will pray in the vineyard of the Lord. I will work, I will pray, I will labor every day in the vineyard of the Lord. I want to be a worker strong and brave. I want to trust in Jesus' power to save. All who will truly come shall find a happy home in the kingdom of the Lord. I will work, I will pray in the vineyard of the Lord. I will work, I will pray, I will labor every day in the vineyard of the Lord.
Let us bow in a word of prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, we thank thee so much for all the things thou hast done for us. Lord, we thank thee for giving us food and shelter. Lord, we thank thee for letting us survive through these storms, Lord. Lord, help those, Lord, that has been in trouble with hurricane, Lord, the ones that need help, need food, Lord. May you strengthen us to be well enough to help them and bless them, Lord, as thou see fit, Lord. Lord, we pray for our brothers and sisters here at the Clarke County Church of Christ. We pray for the ones that are sick, Lord, the ones that hurt themselves, the ones that can't be here today because of illness, Lord. We pray that thou grant them their healthiness, that thou give them their health if it's thy will, Lord. Lord, we thank thee so much for thy son Jesus that you sent down here on the cross and died for us that we may have a right to the tree of life. Lord, we are so thankful that he died and rose again, Lord, to give us a chance to be with you, Lord, one day in heaven. Lord, we pray as we have this Bible class this morning that something will be said to benefit us, Lord, to help us to live that straight and righteous life, Lord, to help us have more long-suffering, Lord, to help us have more patience, Lord, and to have more love for one another, Lord. We pray that these things will happen, Lord. These blessings other we ask in thy son Jesus' name. Amen.
Good morning, good morning. It's good to be here. It's good to see everyone. We are thankful to God for everyone who is here, those who are en route, and we're thankful to God for this opportunity that is granted to us on the first day of the week, that we can come together with those of like precious faith to study God's word that we may grow together. Matthew chapter 12, we started looking at Matthew 12 last week. Matthew 12, We looked at the first 8 verses, Matthew chapter 12. And what we've gathered so far is, from Matthew chapter 12, that Jesus wanted the Jews and the Pharisees to understand that he was Lord of the Sabbath day. Matthew 12 and 8, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. So with that being said, are there any questions or comments about what we studied from the first 8 verses in regard to Jesus being the Lord of the Sabbath day? Any questions, any comments, any thoughts? Now, as we kind of stay in the same lane, when we think about the Sabbath day, what is the Sabbath day? We asked a question last week because the Sabbath day was very important to the Jews in the Old Testament. What was the Sabbath day? Day of rest. It was a holy day. The Sabbath day coincided with the numerical day, the 7th day. It's not the first day. The first day is Sunday. And I believe that even if you go back to creation, you look at, from a numerical standpoint, the first day was Sunday, and then the Sabbath day or the 7th day will coincide with our Saturday. So the Sabbath day, which is the 7th day, coincides with Saturday. So with that being said, let's go back to the Old Testament. Let's look at a couple things. First and foremost, I'm going to show you just how important and how stringent God was about the Sabbath day. Look at Numbers chapter 15. Numbers chapter 15. Remember in Exodus chapter 20, verse number 8, God told them to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. For in 6 days the Lord created the heaven and the earth and all things therein, and he rested the 7th day, and he hallowed it. And so the 7th day or the Sabbath day became a day of rest. And so God wanted Israel to rest. So he told them they needed to respect the Sabbath day. But Numbers 15 started verse number 32. We're talking about the Sabbath day. They found a man doing what? Gathering sticks. I don't know if he was trying to build a fire. I don't know if he was just collecting them for his collection. I don't know why. We're not told that. But he was gathering sticks. And what day was it? It was the Sabbath day. All right. So what should he have been doing? Resting or doing nothing. All right. Keep reading. They put him in war. They put him in custody. So now, and the reason why that's important is because they put him in custody to figure out from Moses and Aaron, what are we going to do with this Sabbath day violator? Now, the reason they put him in war, this had never happened before. So this was a first-time precedent. So what do we do the first time we have something that we've never had before, and we got to figure out? Notice now, they didn't just rush to judgment. They put him in custody, put him in ward to find out what should be done. All right? Let's see if God says what he means and means what he says. All right, let's keep reading. So notice now, I want you to think about something. They put the man who was collecting sticks, they put him in ward until Moses and Aaron can go and find out what the Lord has said shall be the penalty. Now, interesting, I want you to think about something. When the people found the man, they brought him to who? Moses and Aaron. But notice now, it wasn't left up to Moses and Aaron to make that final call. They had to get a word from God. And the reason why that's important, a lot of times people will read the Bible and they'll come to you and they'll ask you questions. They say, well, what do you think? What are your thoughts? It don't matter what I think. It doesn't matter my opinion about it, what God said. And so it was God who gave Moses the penalty for this man who had violated the Sabbath. And so notice what he says in verse 35 again. The Lord said unto Moses. Now, when you read that, do you think of God as a very difficult God, very austere, very stringent type God when you think about stuff like that? Because see, a lot of times people read verses like this and they say, well, you see, that's the kind of God y'all serve. He'll kill a man because a man was just collecting sticks. That's not the point. The point was that God had already said hundreds of years prior, God says, don't do anything on the Sabbath day. So the principle is not that God is this difficult God to please. The principle is God has law and God has commandments that God says must be followed. Don't you have children? When your children say, well, Mom, Dad, can I stay out? Can I stay out to 12, 1 o'clock in the morning? No, when them street lights come on, you better be inside this house. And so if they were not inside the house, didn't you have penalties for them? Weren't there consequences? So now we understand that with our children, ourselves, with humanity, why would we think it'd be different with God? All right, let's keep reading. They stoned him. They stoned him as God commanded. Why? Because he violated the Sabbath. And so when you think about that, here's God saying, here's my law over here. For whatever reason, he decided to not follow what God said and decided to go and pick up sticks. And as a result of that, he was stoned to death. All the children of Israel stoned him to death. That was the penalty. All right, so now here's another thing. When you think about the Sabbath day, has anybody ever had the opportunity to study with somebody who was Seventh-day Adventist? You've had that pleasure? It is a pleasure, isn't it? And so when you study with people of the Seventh-day Adventist faith, their whole premise is what? Huh? Don't function on the seventh day or the Sabbath day. And that premise is based upon the fact they say that the reason why, even on this side of the cross, that in today's time, the reason why we should honor and respect the Sabbath day even now is because the Sabbath day started at creation. What are your thoughts about that? They said from creation, God has said to respect the seventh day. That sounds good. That sounds plausible. But it's not true. The Sabbath day was not given at creation. You never read where Adam and Noah and those patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they didn't observe the Sabbath day because it was not given at creation. So let's look at it. Look, if you will, while you're still in the Old Testament, go to the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 9. Man, I remember one time me and one of the elders in Memphis, we were studying with this guy, with this family, this Seventh-day Adventist family. He was doing some work, and the wife was very interested in the gospel, but her husband and the guy that was doing work at her house, they were staunch Seventh-day Adventists. Man, we studied with them for about 8 hours. But they could not see that the Sabbath day was not given at creation. Numbers chapter 9, I want you to start around verse 10. When I said Numbers, Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 9. So Nehemiah is reminding the people of how God delivered them out of Egypt, right? And so he's reminded of all of the activities, all of the things that God did as he brought them out of Egypt, brought them through the wilderness, led them by day, led them by night. By day, he was a cloudy pillar. By night, he was a pillar of fire. And so God did all of these things so to bring Israel unto himself, to bring them out of Egypt, to bring them through the wilderness, but also in preparation to get them to the promised land. But pay attention to the next two verses. Verse 13 and 14.
You came down also on Mount Sinai.
Now, when did that happen? When did God come upon Mount Sinai? Was that at creation?
No.
Or was that after they came out of Egypt? All right, keep reading.
And spoke with them from heaven, and gave them just ordinances and true laws, good status and commandments. You made known to them your holy Sabbath.
Wait a minute. When they came out of Egypt, Nehemiah says, God made known unto them his holy Sabbath. So if you would ask the question, when was the Sabbath binding? When did it become official from that vantage point? It was binding to the people who came out of Egypt, and it became official to the people that came out of Egypt once they came out of Egypt. Mind you, they weren't observing the Sabbath day, not even in Egypt. So when we look at the foundation for the Sabbath day, yes, God says in 6 days he created the heavens and the earth, and he rested the Sabbath day. But all of those people from Adam all the way up until the time of Moses, they never observed the Sabbath day, the seventh day, whatever day you want to call it. They didn't do that until they came out of Egypt. Any questions or comments? Now, if people would just understand that, and they could appreciate the fact that not only that it wasn't given to us. We didn't come out of Egypt. Huh? Absolutely. Yeah. So that was the foundation for the whole concept of what the Sabbath day was. The word Sabbath means rest. And so the point of the matter is, here's Nehemiah still in the Old Testament, still living at a time where they were observing the Sabbath. And Nehemiah says God gave them the Sabbath at Mount Sinai when they came out of Egypt. Any questions or comments? So now we'll go ahead. So when you think about it, and you think about the fact that, here's a whole entire religion based upon a false premise that people think that people in America living today should be holding to the Sabbath day when the Sabbath day was not given to us and it was not given at creation. Not only that, but look at the book of Ezekiel. Look at Ezekiel chapter 20. Ezekiel chapter 20. Ezekiel chapter 20. We'll start at verse number 10. Ezekiel chapter 20, verse number 10.
Wherefore I caused them to go forth out of the land of Egypt,
You see, going back to God's deliverance of Israel out of Egypt,
and brought them into the wilderness. And I gave them my statutes, and showed them my judgment, which if a man do, he shall even live in them. Moreover also I gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them,
between me and them. God says, I gave them my Sabbath as a sign between me and them, God and Israel.
that they might know that I am the Lord that sanctified them.
Now look at verse number 13 too.
But the house of Israel rebelled.
Now who did God give his Sabbath to?
The house of Israel.
The house of Israel.
But the house of Israel rebelled against me in the wilderness. They walked not in my statutes, and they despised my judgment, which if a man do, he shall even live in them. And my Sabbaths they greatly pollute. Then I said, I will pour out my fury upon them in the wilderness.
So God said he gave them his Sabbaths when they came out of Egypt, while they were in the wilderness. They polluted it. We just saw an example of that where that man was collecting sticks. And God said as a result of that, God said his fury was upon them. The point of the matter is that God gave the Sabbath at Sinai when they came out of Egypt, and he gave it specifically or strictly to the house of Israel. Any questions or comments? So you mark those passages, Nehemiah chapter 9, verses 10 through 14, and Ezekiel chapter 20. So the next time you have the pleasure of studying with those of the Seventh-day Adventist faith, you can show them that that the Sabbath was not binding since creation. It was given specifically to the house of Israel once they came out of Egypt. All right, let's go back to Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12. And notice now in Ezekiel, God says they polluted the Sabbath. And so here it is in Matthew chapter 12, Jesus knowing that the history of Israel, that there were times where they actually violated the Sabbath, and here it is, they trying to find fault with Jesus for doing something that everybody would do on the Sabbath day, and that is eat. Because there was never no law that said you couldn't eat on the Sabbath. All right, Matthew chapter 12, let's pick it up in verse number 9. Matthew 12, verse number 9.
Now, when he had departed from there, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man who had withered hand. And they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on Sabbath, that they might accuse him?
So notice now, they say to Jesus, is it lawful to heal on what day? The Sabbath. What has just taken place? He has just got through eating grain, he and his disciples, on what day? On the Sabbath day. So you can almost kind of see them kind of poking fun at Jesus because the Bible says they were trying to tempt him. Okay, since you breaking the Sabbath anyway, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day or not? So notice what he says.
Then he said to them, What man is there among you who has one sheep? And if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out?
So notice what Jesus says now. Since y'all trying to be so disrespectful, which one of you, if one of your livestock and one of your animals fell into a pit on the Sabbath day, which one of you would just let that animal stay in that pit just because it was a Sabbath day? None of them would do that. If that animal was in a pit on the Sabbath day, they all would go out and they would try to rescue that animal, retrieve that animal. And so Jesus says, think about it. Isn't a man of more value than an animal? Sure he is. Look at verse number 12.
Of how much more value then is a man than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath.
Absolutely. It's lawful to do good, even on the Sabbath day. It's lawful to do good, even on the first day. It's lawful to do good every day. You know why? Because Paul said in Galatians chapter 6, as we therefore have opportunity, let us do good unto all men. So the question then becomes, when do we have the opportunity? Every day, all the time. And so Jesus even found that to be the case even on the Sabbath day. Verse 13, go ahead and read it.
Then he said to the man, Stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and it was restored as whole as the other. Then the Pharisees went out and plotted against him how they might destroy him.
The Pharisees were so upset that Jesus healed this man on the Sabbath day. And so the Bible says they went out and they plotted how they might destroy him. Brother Mitchell. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And you even see that. Y'all ever notice these dog commercials now? You got insurance for dogs. Y'all see the diet that these people have for these dogs. They got hotel for dogs and stuff like that now. And we're not saying people can't take care of the animals. That's not what we're saying. But anytime a dog get more care and more treatment than a human being, something wrong with that picture. And so we see that to be the case in many places. And in a lot of places, you injure or you kill an animal, you will do more time than it would if you took the life of a human being. Absolutely. And so, but Jesus says that the life of a man, a woman, is of more value than that of an animal, than of a sheep. And so Jesus says it is lawful to do good to a human being on the Sabbath day. And so you think about that, and you think about what were they concerned about? They were not concerned about this man being healed. They're more so concerned about keeping the Sabbath day, which in reality they weren't keeping anyway. And so you see the hypocrisy in that. And so you start looking through the New Testament, and what you realize is Jesus did a lot of things. He healed a lot of people on the Sabbath day. Let's look at a couple of examples. Look at John chapter 5. John chapter 5, start at verse number 1. Yep, regular John, as T say. Right after regular Luke. Chapter 5.
And the light shines.
Chapter 5, John 5.
John 5.
Verse number 1.
After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool which is called in Hebrew
Bethesda.
Bethesda, having 5 porches.
So in Jerusalem, they have this area that has porches, and there has a pool there. And so it was custom that God would send an angel down and stir the water, and at a certain season, if you had any type of malady or physical illness or any type of illness or issue from the physical standpoint, if you got into that pool right after the angel stirred it, you would be healed. And so notice what happens.
And these lay a great multitude of sick people, lame,
Blind.
lame, paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water.
So now, if you were in this predicament and you was there, waiting for the moving of the water, what would you be trying to do? You were trying to get in, right? All right, keep reading.
For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring up the water was made well of whatever disease he had. Now a certain man was there who had an infirmity 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he already had been in that condition a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be made well?"
So you think about 38 years, you've had this issue, this problem. And so then here comes Jesus. Here comes a man asking you, do you want to be made whole? Yeah. I've been sitting down here for 38 years. Don't you think I want to be made whole? But notice what happens.
The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no man to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, but while I am coming, another steps down before me."
So you can imagine a lot of people were cutting in line, cutting in front of people to get into that water right after it was stirred by the angel. And so the man tells Jesus, you know what, I want to be made whole, but I don't have anybody to put me into the water. When I try to get down there, somebody cuts me off. All right, read on.
Jesus said to him, "Rise, take up your bed and walk."
Now I want you to think about something. Everybody who's been sitting at this pool know that if you want to be healed, you got to do what? You got to get in the water. But then here comes a man by the name of Jesus. Jesus tells this man to do something totally different. He says, rise up and walk. Notice, he didn't say get into the pool. He says, rise up and walk. So notice what happens.
And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. And that day was the Sabbath.
That day was what?
The Sabbath.
Here goes Jesus again, healing people on the Sabbath day. And as a result of that, notice what happens. aren't we seeing a pattern? What we see is, at the heart of the matter is the Pharisees didn't care about people. Because here it is, these people are suffering with maladies and illnesses and issues. We're talking about for a lifetime for some of these people. They're more so concerned about keeping the Sabbath day than these people being healed. And so they said, man, it is not lawful for Jesus to be healing people on the Sabbath day. And so once again, it was the Sabbath day. All right, keep reading.
He answered to them, he who made me well said to me, take up your bed and walk. Then they answered him, who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk?
Now think about what they're asking now. Who is the man who told you to take up your bed and walk on the Sabbath day? Now, who would be so defiant against our laws and our statutes and our judgment to tell you to violate the Sabbath day to get up and walk? They're so concerned about Jesus violating the Sabbath day, it hadn't even dawned on them that this man is not walking. Absolutely. But when you only concentrate on one thing and you're very cynical in your approach to people and dealing with people, you don't even realize this man is not able to walk. Brother Mitchell. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And what they added that to the law. And the scripture says you not what add or subtract from the word of God.
Absolutely.
They added all that foolishness to the Sabbath, not God.
Right.
So they misinterpreted the Sabbath. Well, they didn't misinterpret. They added their own rules. And Jesus and God is not going to violate his truths.
Absolutely.
So Jesus understood that he ain't doing nothing against the Sabbath that he had written. That he was, he said he was the word of God. They misunderstood. They applied their own rules and laws and statutes to the word. We do that now.
Absolutely.
And so that was the situation then with the Jews and the Pharisees. And we get personal when we translate something and add something to the word of God. That's what happened with those Pharisees.
And that's what, and like we said last week, and like we said at the beginning of class, it was never a law that said you can't do good on the Sabbath day. So Jesus wasn't violating anything. There was never a law that said you couldn't eat on the Sabbath day. So he wasn't violating that. And so that was their own, like you said, their own interpretation. Brother Dowdy.
You know, it's not that the Pharisees were so concerned about the Sabbath, but whatever Jesus did, they nitpick everything that Jesus did. They always were trying to find, the Pharisees always were trying to find a fault in Jesus all the time.
Right.
Jesus did good work, but yet still, it was like Jesus was in sin for doing what he was doing. And so that was the thing. They were always trying to accuse Jesus of sinning, of doing something wrong. That was the Pharisees' problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things you realize is that, somebody once said, you know what, when you do wrong, it's very easy for you to see wrong in other people. And I believe that's a true statement.
He understood. He did certain things. Well, it's just like he knew the man said that was paralyzed,
Mm-hmm.
was healed for 30-something years. He knew that. So he picked certain things to slap the Pharisees with their foolishness. And he came to teach and give the truth. So that's why they were so perturbed, because he was always hitting them in the face.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
With man's law rather than God's law. And he was the truth. And so he came here as to me, a revolution of religion to bring in the truth of kingdom and to be the new covenant to transfer. Man had got away from the word of God, even though 400
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
and he came to transform and bring us back to truth. And so he always, reason it seems like they were picking on him. No, he was picking them.
And
You look at all the situations he did, he always stirred up, and he was almost like a revolutionary. He came, he did something that made them gnash at the teeth, you know what I mean? And they just got angry at him.
oh, absolutely.
He was messing with them.
Well, Jesus was the embodiment, the personal embodiment, the epitome of righteousness. And so here's a man who everything that he did, he was concerned about doing the Father's will. He was concerned about doing what's right. And so everything that he did, he had that goal in mind. Sister Carrie. Was it lawful? They could go out. They could do certain things. But what God said was, God says the Sabbath day, or the seventh day, was a day of rest. That means no working, no gathering food. So it was really a day to reflect just on God and his goodness. And so what has happened, that's a very good question. What happened was, to the point that Brother Mitchell just mentioned, over time, what the Jews did, the Jews even came up with their own measuring system of how far they could even travel on the Sabbath day. Let me show you what I mean. Look at Acts chapter 1. They came up with what was known as a Sabbath day's journey. Acts chapter 1. And so here it is. They are adding their own interpretation, their own thoughts about the Sabbath day. And so they held that. Acts chapter 1. Start off, if you will. Acts chapter 1, look at verse number 9. All right, now this is Jesus getting ready, Jesus ascending back to heaven.
And while they looked steadfastly towards heaven as he went up, behold, 2 men stood by them in white apparel, who also said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will so come in like manner as you saw him go into heaven.
As my father says sometimes, that's not a threat, that's a promise. The same Jesus, not a different Jesus. The same way you saw him go into heaven, he's going to appear the second time. Many people don't believe that. And people live their lives in such a way as to show you they don't believe Jesus Christ is coming back. But he is coming back. I keep reading.
Then they returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem, a 7-day journey.
So they figured, I think it was about 3/4 of a mile, what was considered a Sabbath day's journey. They said you could travel that much on a Sabbath day and not be in violation of the Sabbath day. And so, but even that, though, was something that they added. That's what they came up with. And so here it is, we read in Nehemiah chapter 9, God says, from the time I gave you all my Sabbath, when you were in the wilderness, y'all polluted my Sabbath. They had a man picking up sticks. They had a lot of the Israelites who were sleeping with some of the Canaanite women on the Sabbath day. So from the inception, they had been violating the Sabbath day for all these years, and then here comes Jesus doing good on the Sabbath day, and then they find fault with Jesus. It's amazing how people can do that, and then here it is. Jesus says, you all a bunch of hypocrites. You all are doing wrong, violating all of God's laws and commandments and statutes, adding your own thoughts to it, and then here comes Jesus doing what is right, and y'all want to find fault with him. It's amazing how people can do that. All right, any other questions or comments? Oh, absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's easy when you change the time. Yeah. So if you ever notice, people that claim to be Seventh-day Adventists, they say, well, I believe it's at sunset on Friday, to sunset on Saturday is the Sabbath day. So when you change the time, guess what you can do all up until sunset on Friday? You can do what you want. Not only that, but when does the sun set? What time does it? Absolutely. So when you make up your own laws, you can do whatever you want to do. And so that's what Israel did. And they did that for so many years and so many different generations. So by the time Jesus come on the scene, Jesus knew that these people just playing. You was going to say something, Sister Katrina. Right, right. And not only that, the truth of the matter is that we said at the beginning of class, it wasn't given to us. It was given to Israel when they came out of Egypt. So we on this side of the cross, we got a different mediator, we got a different covenant, and you still got people trying to bind those Old Testament regulations on a group of people that was never designed or even never given to. All right, let's take one more passage. Look at Matthew chapter 15. Let's get a little just ahead of ourselves. Look at Matthew chapter 15. And this is where we start to see, and we'll talk about this when we get to chapter 15, but just for the sake of this morning, I want you to notice Matthew chapter 15, start at verse number 1. The same group of people now, scribes and the Pharisees,
who were from Jerusalem, came to Jesus, saying, why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread.
Now, a couple things. Number one, whenever the scribes and Pharisees came to Jesus, they always try to get to Jesus through the disciples. So whenever they're saying, why do your disciples, they're really talking to Jesus because they're his disciples. And if the disciples are doing it, then they must have learned it from their teacher, which is Jesus. So they really trying to get to Jesus, but they know they can't just keep blaming Jesus, so they keep saying, your disciples. All right, keep reading.
He answered and said to them, why do you also transgress the commandment of God because of your tradition?
Now notice now, they asked Jesus, why do your disciples keep transgressing the tradition of who? The elders. Jesus in turn asked them, why do you also transgress the tradition of who? God. So that's the difference. As you keep reading Matthew chapter 15 and the parallel account is Mark chapter 7, you'll see this exchange is, the exchange was somebody was violating the tradition of the elders or the tradition of men. Jesus says, no, the tradition of God is more important. All right, keep reading.
For God commanded, saying, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother.
So now what Jesus is going to do, he's going to show them just how they have been violating the tradition of God, the word of God. God said, you go back to the Ten Commandments, God says, honor your father and your mother, right? Now, when you read that, what comes to mind when you read honor your mother and father? Huh? Being respectful, being obedient, right? But it goes beyond that. Absolutely, that's what Jesus has in mind. And so when he says, honor your mother and your father, when your mother and father get to a point, especially in Jewish culture, where they can no longer work, and now that you got a career and you got a job and you making money, you got to take care of mother and father. But notice what happens.
Let him put him to death. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is a gift to God.
Mm-hmm.
Then he need not honor his father or mother, thus you have made the commandment of God of no effect.
In verse number 5, Jesus mentioned this thing called a gift. When you read Mark's account, he tells us what the gift is called. It's called Corban. So what happened, the Jews on this occasion and on many other occasions, they found a way to circumvent taking care of mother and father. What they came up with was, as Sister Carrie mentioned, the system of keep building on to each other how till you get where you're going. They came up with a system. So when you go down to the temple, the priest is there. And so when you go down to the temple, you give your gift to the priest for the dedication of the temple. It was known as Corban. So they say, well, to get around taking care of mother and father, we'll just take our money, our gift, and take care of the temple, and then we'll get a little kickback from taking care of the priest and the temple, and we want her to take care of mother and father. That's what Jesus came upon when he was talking to the Jews. Jesus is seeing all of this play out in front of him, but yet and still, they want to find issue with Jesus because his disciples don't wash their hands before they eat their food. Once again, there was no law in the Old Testament. Search all 600 of them. You won't find one law that says you got to wash your hands. Now, for sanitary purposes and health purposes, it's good to wash your hands. But there's no violation of the law of God if you don't wash your hands. And so that's why they said, why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? The elders, the rabbis, and the priests, they came up with that, not God. So what you have to be very careful about is it what God said, or is it the tradition that we set up? And we need to be very careful about trying to establish and hold on to a tradition that we set up where God never made one. And so that's what Jesus encountered when he came upon the Jews, the scribes, and the Pharisees. And yet and still, they try to take issue with Jesus because Jesus kept doing good on the Sabbath day. Any questions or comments? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. I remember I was listening to this older white sister. She was talking about her and her husband. They were missionaries, and so they go into different countries and different places, taking Bibles, preaching the gospel, setting up Bibles, so doing all. They did this for years. And she said when they went to Africa, and they found it, kind of strange that in Africa, one of the practices was when they got ready to sing at the congregation in Africa, they stood up to sing. And so she thought it was odd because, in a lot of white congregations, everybody sit there quiet, kind of stoic to some degree. And so she said she remember going up to the preacher and asked the preacher, she's like, y'all know y'all shouldn't be standing while y'all was singing. Then she said her husband stopped her and said, well, honey, you do realize we're not in America. And so she said that was a teaching moment for her because she realized that in that moment, here it is, I'm trying to bind something in America that we do in America over in Africa. They have no concept of how we worship in America and vice versa. And so we have to be very careful, even from cultural practices, that we are not trying to establish things that we do just because it's preference and we like it, and that's what we do here, and then we try to make sure other people do it, and if they don't do it, they somehow are wrong when it's just something that we've established. That's what Jesus encountered when he came to the earth nearly 2,000 years ago. And not only that, but he found people who were just dead wrong about how they interpreted the scriptures. And that's why Jesus says, you do err, not knowing the scriptures nor the power of God. So we need to be very careful that we don't become those kind of people who are try to make people, hold people to our thoughts, our preferences, and our traditions, as opposed to them being bound to what God has said. Any other questions or comments? So going back to what we mentioned earlier, when you look at the Sabbath day, you realize that the Sabbath day was not binding since creation. God gave it to Israel when they came out of Egypt while they were in the wilderness, and he gave it to them, but even then, they were polluting it. And so when Jesus came on the scene, these people were already violating the Sabbath, but they found issue with Jesus because he did good on the Sabbath. And so if you have an opportunity to study with those of the Seventh-day Adventist faith, all you got to do is show them. That was never given to us. That was given to the house of Israel when they came out of Egypt. Thank you for your attention.